Thank you for joining us today. We're delighted to welcome Olympic champion Imogen Grant to the CPI Sports Network. She'll be talking to us today about her memories and experiences as an elite sports person, as well as her campaigning and using of her platform for positive good. For those of you who don't know a lot about rowing or aren't aware of Imogen's credentials, she is a Cambridge Blue and a boat race winner. She is an Olympic champion, having won the lightweight double sculls at Paris in 2024. She won the IOC Climate Action Award, and she's a campaigner for sports activity as well as environmental issues, as well as in her spare time working as a doctor at the Wexham Park Hospital in Slough. Thank you so much for joining us today, Imogen. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've managed to find a little bit of time away from the day job, managed to get my training in, and I'm glad to be here now.
Great. But first of all, I wondered if we could just get a little bit of your background about how you ended up starting rowing and how that evolved when you got to university and your memories of competing in the boat race.
So I grew up in Cambridge, lived there all my life, and always knew that I wanted to go to the University of Cambridge, and decided pretty young that I wanted to be a doctor as well. So when I arrived, rowing really wasn't on the cards. I hadn't tried it at school. I knew the boat race existed, but I think Cambridge had been losing for a while, so I wasn't particularly interested in finding out anymore. But Cambridge is one of the rowing meccas of the UK. There's something like 1,000 or 2,000 people every year learn to row at Cambridge. It's a massive proportion. And during Freshers' Week, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 18-year-old Imogen went with all of her Freshers' friends to Boaty Cocktails, which is an event that was held during Freshers' Week by the boat club of my college. And I mean, it's the classic lure in. If you put your name down for a taster session, they gave you 2 free drinks. And as a fresher, I thought that was a perfect deal. Put my name down. I don't really even think I was planning to go to the session. I put it as far away as possible, got my free drinks and thought nothing of it. But when the time rolled around for the day to happen, it was still in the back of my mind, and I did it. I thought maybe I won't go, maybe I will go, no, maybe I won't go, and ended up chasing them down, the group that had already left from the college on the way to the boathouse. But I'm so glad I'd made it to that first session, because everything snowballed from there. I got in the boat and pretty much enjoyed it from the get-go. From that point onwards, my university career was always being a student athlete. It was about balancing my studies with rowing and trying to take both of them to a really high level. So in my second year, I decided I wanted to trial for the boat races and began representing Cambridge in the light blue from then onwards.
How difficult was it to juggle, such a high level of rowing training and competition with what isn't can't be considered a very simple degree? Medicine is probably one of the most difficult subjects you can do, and I imagine getting up at 5 a.m. every morning in the freezing cold must be quite challenging.
I definitely had my fair share of challenges and my fair share of lecturers and supervisors tell me that it was a bad idea and I should think twice about doing it. But they actually did a study of the CBC athletes and their grades, and on average, a blue at Cambridge does better in their exams than someone who doesn't do blues level, so university level sport. And I definitely found that was the case for me. It forced me to be efficient. It forced me to prioritize. There was a great sense of achievement turning up to 9 a.m. lectures, knowing that I'd already done a rowing session that day and most people had just rolled out of bed.
And what are your memories of taking part in the boat race?
Oh, amazing. Given that I'd learnt to row at Cambridge, it was the first big event that anybody ever talked about. And actually, the year that I learnt to row was the 2014-2015 season. And the 2015 women's boat race was the first women's boat race to be held in the same place on the same day as the men's boat race. And it was a massive deal. And I went down and watched with all of my college boat club friends. And I have really, really vivid memories from that day watching these incredible women trailblazing, doing this race for the first time. So from that point onwards, there was always that bit of curiosity maybe I could do that one day, maybe I could do that too. And yeah, I had the privilege of racing with some incredible people at Cambridge. I made the blue boat 3 times, set the course record twice. And it's something that is such a special experience. I wish more people could experience the boat race because it's like no other rowing race in the world.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and Imogen, you've spoken about how you were a late comer to rowing, but one of the things that you've become known for, as well as being an amazing rower, is your advocacy on the state of our waterways in the UK. And I wondered if that interest predated your involvement in rowing, or was it developed at the same time as your rowing, I guess?
I think the seeds of it were planted when I was younger. I was brought up vegetarian, and I think that was the first way that I interacted with the idea of sustainability and the idea of things being good for the planet. I've never eaten meat, and as a child would get asked about it, and I cared about the animals and I didn't want the animals to die, but actually more important to me, my answer was always, well, it's more sustainable. Beef and things like that have a huge carbon footprint and I don't eat them. And I think that's good. And so that was always there bubbling away, but I'd always been distracted by other things that I wanted to do, whether that was medicine or the sports I played when I was growing up, or friends, family, that sort of thing. And it was only after rowing for a number of years, probably 5 years into my rowing career, that I really started thinking more seriously about it, because I'd been on the waterways for long enough that I'd started to see them changing.
Sure. And did you was it an active decision you made when you were after becoming an athlete to use your platform? Was that something you thought about doing before you did it, or was it something that you just thought it was part and parcel of being a professional athlete, was to talk about something that you care about?
I think it was a bit of both. I definitely want to credit the Powered by Purpose program, which is a program run by the True Athlete Project, funded by UK Sport, the first of its kind to actively champion athlete activism. That was a massive catalyst for giving me the confidence and the tools to actually use my platform. But for me, being an athlete isn't just about playing sport. And I think having an athlete who only does their sport and nothing else is a very narrow view of what we can do as sports people. I have kids come up to me saying that I'm an inspiration, and I get asked to do talks and speak to people, and it's so much more impactful when I can talk about something that isn't just trying to go fast in a straight line on a 2-kilometer rowing lake. And I definitely feel a responsibility to use the interest and platform that I have gained from my rowing skills to talk about something that's really important to me as well. I think it makes a more genuine conversation, and I think you get a lot more respect and interest from your fans and followers actually when you're not just something one-dimensional.
And in terms of, because this is a video for people who are working in communications and sport, and I wondered from an athlete point of view how different it was talking about your sporting performance, so whether the boat's going faster or not. And I guess for that, you're either winning or you're losing, aren't you? Whereas talking about something of public policy like the state of our rivers, it's a little bit less clear cut. Is it similar or is it different, and how does it differ?
I definitely think for most athletes, taking that first step to talk about something that isn't them and their performance and their team or their race is very daunting. It feels more out of your comfort zone. I think often athletes get held to quite a high standard. And people are quick to point out hypocrisy or point out a lack of knowledge and things like that. But I really don't think it should be a barrier to caring, because sport is all about caring, and actually a lot of activism is just about caring on a foundational level. So I think it definitely took a while for me to feel confident and have the knowledge and the stats for myself to feel backed up to talk about this stuff. But I definitely think it's really important and gives me a lot of perspective.
And you mentioned working as a doctor. Has that informed your advocacy as well? I mean, what role does that play in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I once, someone asked me how I balanced it all, because rowing, medicine, and sustainability seemed like they weren't linked in the slightest. And I said to them, well, they seem so perfectly linked to me. You know, the sustainability piece, we're trying to have a healthier world, we're trying to lessen our impact. That's so tied to us as humans, our physical and mental health. And then what's better for your physical and mental health than doing sport and getting outside in nature, which is going to mean that you see the impacts of the climate crisis. It feels very linked to me. And those three things, I think, are the three most important parts of what make up me as well.
And
How
sorry,
how supportive was the university? Obviously, you know, when you're talking in your student days and beyond about the state of the rivers, you know, including in Cambridge, how supportive were they? Did they you know, want to launch campaigns with you, or do something to address the pollution in the river Cam, or did they just leave you to your own devices?
To be fair, I've never directly approached the university themselves about doing something. The boat club was very supportive in terms of just trying to take the first steps. I think rowing as a sport is at the beginning of the sustainability journey, but even things like sharing out secondhand kit and making sure the gel wrappers that everybody uses get thrown away properly, and not using washing up liquid to wash the boats because that's polluting in the waters, things like that have felt very empowering. And I felt the same with the national team as well. Once I started talking about it a bit more, the number of people that suddenly felt like they had the permission to come and tell me an idea that they'd had, something else that we could implement, it really felt like it was gaining momentum.
and there seems a very authentic link, as you've said, Imogen, between your sport and the cause that you are advocating for. And you know, Sarah Story has done similar for cycling. You know, and that authenticity seems very important. But what advice would you give to an athlete that is thinking about taking this step into advocacy? Are there any dangers to watch out for? Is there anything that you can take encouragement for? Yeah. Any thoughts?
I mean, the first thing I would say is go for it and see what happens, because often I think your imagination of what might happen is always worse than what's actually going to happen. I was really worried if I was going to get backlash. For example, we still fly to all our training camps, and that's not really something I have control over a lot of the time. And I was concerned that if I started speaking up more about sustainability, people would start pointing fingers that I'm not doing enough. I'm not, you know, living a completely sustainable life. But perfect is the enemy of good, and doing something is better than doing nothing. Yeah, I think in terms of athletes taking that first step as well, I think it can be really enriching as an athlete too. One of the things that having that sustainability advocacy has given me over the last couple of years is none of my eggs weren't just in one basket. I wasn't just a rower. I was a rower and a sustainability advocate. And that meant that I had more balance, I had more perspective, and I genuinely think it makes me a better athlete, because you talk to athletes, and mental health is a massive problem and people feel fully tied to their sport. And if they get dropped by a sponsor or their team loses a game, it can really feel like the end of the world. And for me, I think one of the big solutions and things to combat that is finding something else that an athlete is passionate about and going towards that as well. I genuinely think it makes you a better athlete.
Yes, you use something in your life that's not sport.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got several things, Imogen. With your medical career as well. Uh, Again, thinking about some of the people who are watching this, they are going to be people who are working with athletes to support them with their communications. David's done um, a lot of that. I've done some of that as well, and it's always interesting to hear from an athlete point of view. What kind of support have you had, and what would you have liked to have had, I guess, really, in supporting you in your dealings with the media or your social media or whatever, really, I guess.
I definitely think I was very lucky to do the boat race early in my career, which is a very high profile event and has a significant amount of media. And literally as a second year university student who'd been rowing for about a year and a half, I was sat down in media training, and I had explained to me quite early on the impact of the media for good or for bad. And I think that was really beneficial for me in terms of understanding where that fits in being an athlete. I think in terms of other supports, one of the challenges I think I've faced is I'm the one in the team that speaks up about sustainability. And so initially, I think it's fantastic because I felt like I was gaining a lot of momentum, because if there was a question about rivers or a question about sustainable travel or this or that, people would go, oh, Imo, you talk about this. Why don't you talk about that? And that felt great because it felt like my identity as somebody who cares about the environment was linked with my identity as being an athlete. That's still the case, but as time has gone on, I can't fulfill all of those requests. And I sometimes worry that because I've been so vocal, it means that others haven't stepped up. And I'd quite like to share the passion and share that platform with some of my other fellow athletes. Some of them are really passionate about sustainability, but some of them are passionate about other things. And I'd love for them to take that first step as well, because I think, especially in a sport like rowing, it lacks the personal stories, it lacks that personal touch at times. And the more that we can have more going on, the more interest there's going to be.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess you've talked about having some challenges. I guess the challenge with talk about public policy, sustainability is it does open you up to challenge, perhaps in a way which talking about your sport performance, it doesn't. Has there been a moment where you thought, gosh, I wonder if I do really want to put myself in this space? Or, I mean, you spoke at the Labour Party conference last year. I mean, how did that come about?
That was amazing, actually. I was at the homecoming, the Team GB homecoming event, and Lisa Nandy is the head of DCMS. She's the Secretary of State for DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sports. And so UK sport and Olympic sport comes under that banner. She gave a short address there, and there were quite a lot of athletes making full use of the free bar, but I watched her come off stage and start chatting to a couple of people, and it was one of the first times that I've really been in a room with someone that genuinely calls the shots, genuinely would have an impact on what could happen in the next 4 years, could potentially impact how my preparations for the next Olympics would look like. And so I went up and I introduced myself to her, and I said, thought you spoke really well. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Elite sport's amazing. I just really appreciate it. And I was contacted a few weeks later about the upcoming Labour conference and about introducing her, which was how I ended up speaking there. I think initially I was a little bit daunted. about, I guess, taking a step towards the political. It's something that some sporting figures do. They have a sporting career and then go into a political career, and that was never something that had crossed my mind at all. But the big reason that I decided to go and decided to accept that invitation and give that speech was for that same reason. It was to be in a room with the people that make the decisions. Whatever party that would have been, I got to stand there and talk about what I thought was really important and try and get that message across to, all of the people in that room who were there to listen to me. And I found it very inspiring to be in a place where I could talk directly to the people that could actually change policy.
Yes, I think there must be something about rowers. I won't name names, but I was at the Conservative Party conference after Rio with some athletes, and we met Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time, and the only athlete who took the opportunity to challenge the Prime Minister on area public policy was also a rower. So it must be something in your sporting DNA. Yeah, definitely.
Imogen, I just wonder if we could take a little step back and to your journey after the boat race and being selected by Team GB. Can you talk us through your call up, as it were, and then qualifying for Tokyo, and then what your memories were of that very unusual and certainly unique Olympic Games in Tokyo?
It all happened quite fast in some ways. To get the timeline straight, so I learned to row in 2014, and a medical degree is 6 years usually. By the time I was in my 4th year of my medical degree, it was 2018. I'd been to one under-23 World Championships, and we hadn't performed particularly well, but it was my first time being on an international stage, and I knew that I wanted more of that. In the 2018 season, I did some racing in my single, and at one of the selection trials, I came 3rd overall out of the lightweights. At the Olympics, the only lightweight event is the lightweight women's double, which means there are 2 lightweight women who are able to go. And I came 3rd at that trials. And it was the first time that I was within touching distance, maybe. It was the first sort of performance that I think made some of the Team GB coaches notice who I was. And it was at that point after that trial that my coach sat me down and asked me, do you want to go to the Olympics? Is that a dream that you have? And it sort of surprised me a little bit. I don't think it had really been on my mind. They were still 2 years away. I was in the middle of a medical degree. It was my first year of being on placements in the hospitals, and I was feeling very overwhelmed with the work and the training and trying to fit everything in. But I said, I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, yes, I'd love to go to the Olympics. At this point, the 2020 Olympics was going to be the final one with our event in it, the final one with the lightweight women's double. And so it was kind of a last chance. And my coach said to me, look, if you want to give this a go, if you want to try and make it, you have to go to Caversham, where the National Training Centre is, and you have to stop your degree and you have to move and give it a shot. And at this point, I had basically no international experience. The best result to my name was this 3rd place at the domestic trials. And I think my coach probably saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at that point, but I trusted his advice. I thought about it. And I did. I took time out of my degree to go and row full time, move away from Cambridge for the first time in my life, and give it a go with the senior national team. It just so happened that summer I did go to the under-23 World Championships again, and I became under-23 World Champion in the single, and then went on to get a bronze medal at the Senior World Championships, again in the lightweight single in the same year. So the results were beginning to come, but they only came after I'd made that leap of faith. And then my first year in the senior team was the qualification year. So the 2019 World Championships is where the majority of the rowing boats qualify for the Olympic Games. For the lightweight women's double, it's top 7. You have to come top 7 at the 2019 World Championships to be definitely qualified. Qualify the boat, not necessarily your name, but the boat itself and the tickets ready to go to the Olympic Games in 2020. At the start of the season, I was in the boat, then I was seat raced out of the boat, and then basically through pure luck, one of the girls had an injury and I was put back in the boat 6 weeks before Worlds. And it was very much a crash course in how to scull a lightweight double, but we came away with a bronze medal at the 2019 World Championships, and qualified for the games. So it was a pretty whirlwind 12 months, my first experience of being in the senior team.
And then obviously COVID happened. And so that must have thrown a massive spanner in the works with the delay to 2021 of the Tokyo Games.
Yeah, it was a massive surprise. We were on training camp in the February of 2020, and the first bits of news started popping up when we flew home from that camp. I think we found out that the team that was meant to fly out for the next camp in the same place had opted not to. And that was that first inkling of something's going on that's going to be big, and it's going to come and hit us pretty hard. Yeah, it was a massive shock. I had been planning to take 2 years off my degree and go back to complete my degree in the autumn of 2020. So I had to argue my case for another year of taking time out, which was a thing all in of itself. And I spent 16 weeks training in our living room of a first floor London flat with no outdoor space over that summer, without even knowing whether the games was going to go ahead in 2021.
Wow. And then you had your first experiences of the Olympic Games and missed out on a medal by the smallest of margins. What are your memories of that?
Yeah, Tokyo was incredible. Now that I've been to Paris, I know that I was missing out on. But I'm forever grateful to the Japanese government for allowing the athletes to compete, because ultimately we all wanted to be there racing, even if our friends and family weren't there, even if the spectators weren't there. And it was a massive privilege to get to do that throughout the pandemic. Tokyo didn't go the way we wanted it to. We definitely weren't favourites going into the Olympic Games, but we'd picked up a medal in each of the regattas that we'd raced in the lead up to the Olympics. And so our name was in and amongst the predictions. We were predicted to get on the podium, and I suppose we nearly did. We were 4th by 0.01 seconds, and in that photo finish, it's probably 1.5 centimeters, the margin. And we were 0.5 seconds off the gold medal as well. The race was so tight. The margins had been so tight in our event all season. And I genuinely think if we had rerun that race 100 times, different people would have won in different orders every single time. I remember I didn't know where we'd come when we crossed the finish line, and I was sitting, panting, looking up, and first and second came up pretty quickly. Italy, then France, and they were screaming and celebrating. But the third place took a long time because the photo finish was so tight. But it finally flashed up as third Netherlands, and it was just like I felt nothing. I didn't even feel sad straight away. It was just that feeling of, I guess that's it. You know, what do you do at this point? We packed our bags for the podium, because you have to make sure that just in case you have your kit and a flag and things like that. And I had that thought that, well, I'm not going to go and open that bag and put those clothes on. We're going to paddle into the pontoon. We're going to take the boat out of the water. We're going to put it back on the rack and walk away. And yeah, it was a very strange couple of minutes. And I think when my brain started to catch up with what was happening, I sort of ran through, did we make any mistakes? Did we do something wrong? And the conclusion was no, we hadn't done anything wrong. And so in that moment, I decided, regardless of where my emotions were, because obviously I'd rather have come away with a medal, that I was really proud of that race. I was really proud of making it to the start line, rowing the way that we'd rowed, leaving it all out there, regardless of the result. And I remember having an interview with Matthew Pinsent pretty soon afterwards, and my doubles partner Emily was not in a state to come take the interview with me, as we're generally obliged to, so I had to do it by myself. And I remember saying, well, that was a race, wasn't it? I'm really proud of that. This isn't the end, and I'm really glad that I've been able to do that justice, I guess.
And were you given guidance by Team GB and by extension the IOC about what you were or weren't allowed to talk about with regards to um, the sort of environmental issues or any sort of campaigning and opinions that sort of go beyond sport, or were you so focused on the actual competition that you didn't think that was the right time or place to say anything?
I think in Tokyo, it wasn't really the right place to bring something like that up. I think, to be honest, if there had been anything other than sport talked about, it would have been COVID and the pandemic rather than anything else. I was still quite early in myself talking about it, so I don't think I would have felt confident bringing it up as a topic anyway.
Sure, I understand. And so when you finished with Tokyo, you went straight back to university, and how did you manage to juggle training for Paris with studying for your degree and training at home rather than in Caversham?
It was quite different, but in some ways quite familiar. In a lot of ways, I went straight back into the routine that I'd found when I first learnt to row, being a student athlete and balancing it. I was a full-time student for 2 out of 3 of the years of the Paris Olympiad, so I graduated in 2023. And I'm glad I did graduate then, because it gave me 1 year of proper focus, which I think was very appropriate. But I went back to finish my medical degree. My doubles partner went to work in an auction house for 6 months or so. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to come back. I knew I wanted to come back, but I knew that I needed to do something that wasn't rowing for a little while, even though rowing was there. And I genuinely think it made us better athletes. Honestly, having that perspective and space and being real people for a while rather than being tied to the training center. And yeah, there was more flexibility, there was more variety. And I think we didn't row the double for about 9 months after the Tokyo Olympics. We jumped in the double again about 4 weeks before the European Championships, which were in, I think, September of 2022. But it felt so fresh when we got back in together as a combination, and really the improvements came so quickly. And I was very nervous before that first race back. It felt like I needed to make sure I could perform to prove that I hadn't taken a performance hit by going back to Cambridge and being a full-time student. But my doubles partner said to me, I think we've got something quite special. And we won that race, beating the gold and silver medalists from the year before in Tokyo quite handily. We had a huge margin in rowing terms, a length or so of clear water. And from that point onwards, we both knew exactly what we wanted, because we'd been so close the last time, and we knew that we were going to do it and do it our way.
And how you mentioned that after Tokyo, after you'd raced in Tokyo, it was very difficult going and talking to the media, certainly for your partner. What was the experience like then in Paris? How was that?
The same amount of tears, that's for sure. It was, yeah, very different. The media after the Tokyo final was present, but I think because of the pandemic, the numbers were reduced, as it were, and we hadn't won a medal, so we didn't have to do that full media circuit. So we'd been pre-warned in Paris. Our women's quad had won their gold on the day of our semi-final. So they'd been through it all by the time we raced, and they warned us to bring foods and bring recovery stuff and all of this, because it was long and it was overwhelming and amazing all at the same time. The interviewers at this point, I think I knew a few of them because we'd sort of seen each other through the circuit. So to see the emotion on their faces, and then us just in floods of tears as well, having just won an Olympic gold medal. There was so much emotion, so much adrenaline. In that first 24 hours after winning, I think I spent 12 minutes seeing my family and friends. The rest of it was in taxis, doing interviews, going to the BBC set, going to the Channel 4 set, all of those ones in and around it. It was absolutely hectic.
Fantastic. And, it sounds, Imogen, that in sort of bad times and good times, you enjoy, at least, or get something out of talking to the media. But I know that's not the case for every athlete, and it really isn't for everyone. What would you, how would you encourage your fellow athletes to get something out of that relationship? To enjoy it more, or to have the confidence to front up, whatever happens in the water, really. Yeah.
I think for me, it has always come fairly naturally. I enjoy, even privately dissecting races and thinking about what I could have done better, and talking about things that I think are important. That's always something that I've enjoyed doing. And so doing it as an athlete, it feels really special for other people to care about what I'm doing. And so, of course, I want to be able to share the little insight that I can with the people who are asking me questions. I think some athletes find it daunting, find it nerve-wracking. I think they sometimes worry that the media wants to catch them out, wants to put them on the spot and force them to answer a question that makes them look bad. But to be honest, I just don't think that's really the case. I think I'd say to them, in general, or almost 99.9% of the time, the person interviewing you is rooting for you to have a good answer, and that you can redo it. I don't know. I think people sometimes put pressure on themselves in the interviews, but I think for me, I always want to be as honest as I can, within reason if necessary, but if we're still competing. But other than that, being honest and being myself has always been the way forwards.
And then that has led to you getting recognition from the IOC for your advocacy as well. What was that like?
It was a massive surprise. I really feel like I could be doing more. And I think one of the challenges being athletes is you do still need to be an athlete first and foremost. You have to make sure you're recovering well. You have to make sure you're eating well. And sometimes those things can come up in direct contradiction to a cause that you're trying to advocate for. But I think for me, it was just, I just needed to do it. It was just important.
And as you said, I think very effectively, your media facing work, your advocacy isn't a distraction from performance. It actually supports performance, I think, is what I think is how you've spoken about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just gives you another pillar to lean on. And in general, I think, I've seen a few papers that suggest that athletes who study or do something else is really beneficial. I believe it might be Australia that almost stipulates it for some of their athletes. They have to be doing something else to be an athlete on the national team. And we're supremely lucky to have the lottery funding in the UK. I think it enables athletes to be at their best. But what it also does is remove that need to have something else by design, so you can do more training. But I think about a lot of the US team who all had full-time or part-time jobs in the lead up to the Olympics. Specifically, for example, the US men's four who won gold, they were all full-time working up until a year, 9 months before the games, and then they were able to taper it down. And I mean, they went unbelievably fast and they won. So you can't say it was a bad thing that they had that balance and something to take your mind off it.
I've got one last question, Imogen. If you could go back and speak to yourself when you were starting out in rowing or in advocacy, what advice would you give your younger self?
Don't put so much pressure on yourself. I think it's really easy to have an all or nothing mentality, black and white thinking. I definitely had it when I was first trying to talk about sustainability, worrying that because I wasn't completely perfect, I wasn't qualified to talk. And I had it when I was starting out rowing, where a bad outing would ruin my entire day, because how could I possibly have a good day if I'd done this one thing wrong at 6:30 in the morning when I was barely awake? And having more self-forgiveness and less of a tight grip on that need for perfection has been so helpful in enabling me to do everything that I do.
Yeah,
fantastic. Imogen, just finally from me, you've moved to hospital in Slough. Was that done by design so that you would be not so far away from Caversham to look ahead to 2028, or was it just a happy coincidence?
No, it was absolutely just to make sure that I was still in the right area where all the rowing happens. I live in Henley. We're actually buying a house here at the moment, so I can imagine that we'll be here for the foreseeable future for many years to come. And yeah, I've really enjoyed getting stuck into work as a doctor. It's a totally new challenge, and I think again brings me so much perspective when I'm looking after patients who are so ill and can't trust their bodies, you know, with load, with effort, with all of this. It makes me really grateful for what I'm able to do.
So you're very much planning to compete in 2028. And what else is on the horizon? You don't seem to be someone who wants to sit on their hands. Have you got ambitions, or would you consider moving into politics later on in your busy life when your athletic career is over, or are you happy just to focus on using your platform as an athlete to help create social change?
At the moment, I'm definitely trying to consolidate all of the things that I do and make sure what I'm doing is sustainable. I definitely want to go to the next Olympic Games. It's going to look different because the lightweight women's double isn't in the Olympic Games anymore. The events have shifted, so things are looking a bit more open-ended to try and figure out where I might lie within that. I've just started my 6 months of mentorship, which was the prize from the IOC Climate Action Awards, where I've been paired with a professional from Deloitte who is an expert in sustainability. So I'm excited for what we're able to create in the next 6 months. I'm hoping it's going to be some framework for rowing events to help them analyze how they could run them more sustainably. It's something that World Rowing is looking into internationally, and I'm hoping to help do that domestically as well.
Fantastic. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, Imogen. Thank you on behalf of the CIPR for taking the time to talk to us. And I'm sure the viewers who watch our interview will learn a great deal about the power of sport and of athletes to make a positive change on society. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imogen.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Very nice to speak to you.
You too.